Hello, I'm Barbara Field, and welcome to the Journey of Grief, Becoming Us Without Them. This channel was created so that people who are grieving all sorts of losses have a place to meet and hear other people that share their experience and sort of normalize the grief experience and perhaps offer one another resources. And today I have invited Stephanie Lake, and Stephanie is the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Other Drug Intervention Services Coordinator at UC Davis in California. And Stephanie, how about if you introduce yourself and tell us about your work as it relates to students and grief?
Sure. So I've been at Davis for 27 years. It'll be 28, which I cannot believe, in October. And I think what really resonates to me when Barbara asked me about this is I have a unique perspective is I deal with students in some form of recovery or just some sort of sober curious, I like to say, or what they don't even realize is a lot of times grief can lead them to their substance use, whether it's actual addiction, whether it's just using too much, because the group that I work with is 18 to 26-year-olds in the undergrad population. I also work with the graduate population, which can be anywhere from 26 to 40. And no one really talks about grief when you're that young, I should say, except like I've had so many of my students that are like sobbing in my office going, why can't I get over it? And I love to say that, grief is not like a broken arm. You don't put a cast on it and in 6 weeks you're better. It comes and goes and it comes and goes in waves. And for some students, I can be working with them for months. I'm very fortunate that I'm one of the few counselors at Davis that does not have a short-term limit. Most of the people at Davis can see 10 to 15 sessions with a counselor. I can see them long-term. And a lot of times, grief is not the first topic we talk about. It's the substances. I have one student who I adore, who I've been working with almost a year, and he's getting his PhD, so he's a little bit older. And he finally said to me, oh, can we do some work around my best friend? And I said, sure. I'm also trained in comprehensive resource model as well as you are, Barbara. And so I was able to do some really intense grief work with him because he felt like even though this happened when he was, I think, 17, he's now 28. He's never dealt with the grief, and he's used and his drugs of choice are cannabis, a little bit of alcohol, but mainly cannabis. So he was numbing for 10 years. And now that he's doing some of the work and starting to feel his feelings, he's like, oh, I think I'm ready. And I put that in quotes because, to deal with it. And so we've done our first session where he literally just sobbed and really got in touch with that little kid that felt like he abandoned his friend. And I was able to talk about through the CRM process, like, what is the real truth? And the real truth was there was nothing he could have done. And that doesn't mean he doesn't still need to grieve his friend. So now we're really, and he'll come back next week and we'll go more into it because, as I've said, it's a process. It's not like one and done. And I think that's one of the things that I try to tell my students is it's not one and done. I think another thing that I get to really work on them is grieving, like when they're about to graduate. They don't think about the fact that they're graduating as a grief process because they've been knowing what their schedule's like for 4 to 5 years. They know what they're doing. And I've had so many people that are like, now what do I do? Oh my God. And so it's a different type of grief, but it's still a grief because they're grieving their adolescence, they're grieving their friendships that are because a lot of people are moving away. So I get to talk to them about how grief is not linear. I think so many people think, oh, there's stages that I need to go through. No. I mean, yes and no, but not that I don't agree with the stages, but there's different types of grief. So I get to work with some of those different types of grief.
Cool. Yeah, so first there may be the loss that they don't even know how to grieve,
Right.
and going all the way back to the beginning, parents divorcing, moving,
Right.
all of those kind of things that people kind of pack up and move on, pack up and move on.
Right.
So then they discover addiction, and
Yes,
the addiction life steals many things, many parts of you and
yes,
your life have to be grieved when you wake up and realize, oh no.
yes.
So let's just talk about that. So, as college students,
Yep.
what are the kinds of losses that they sustain that they just add to the pile?
Sure. So a lot of the biggest ones that I will see is, and I get students refer to me a variety of different ways. They can come in on their own, they can come in from coaches, professors, other counselors. I would say a lot of my clients actually come in from the athletic department because something has happened where either they're in trouble and they got caught, or they've realized, oh my God, I'm not going to get the position I want, or again, I'm about to graduate and I'm not going professional. And so they have to grieve that this is a huge identity for them. And different sports, there's more drinking and drug use than others, and I don't need to go into them unless you'd like me to, I can. But I think one of the things that I try to really work with them on is giving them tools because they didn't think of it as grief. They're like, oh, I just need to, like, I got hurt and I need to move on. Oh, I'm not first string anymore, so I just have to deal with it. And I'm like, yes, you have to deal with it. However, you're grieving one, the community, because a lot of people, their life is around their community. The other group that and so it's grieving and moving on. I would say another group that I work with a lot is the fraternity and sorority community, where there's a ton of drinking and drug use within the fraternity and sorority. And I'll never forget, this one student came in and he was just turning 21 and he had been the party guy. That was his, you know, that was his name in the house. And he decided he didn't want to drink anymore because he wanted to get healthy. And he was like, so how do I tell everybody that I'm not having the parties anymore? And I said, well, my recommendation is you tell one person and we can move on from there. Well, he decided at the annual brotherhood meeting, which was a Sunday night where he had 80 members of his fraternity, he was going to get up and tell everyone that he decided not to drink anymore. Not what I suggested, but what he did. And he said the biggest grief and loss for him was when people didn't believe him and showed up that next Friday to party. And he's like, I'm serious. So he had to really let the guys know that he was serious. And so we worked on tools for how we could move on and still be a main. And actually, what he ended up doing was he changed the trajectory of the fraternity to that they don't have to party every Friday night, that they can maybe have a couple drinks or go to a movie, but he had to grieve his label of being the party guy. I've had like D1 athletes, that have had to grieve the fact that they're not going to make it to professionals. I've had people that have actually gone on to become pros and then grieve that they didn't get as far as they wanted to. So I think there's different types of grief that they have to deal with. But I all try to, like, some of the things that I talk about is, what do you really like to do for fun? Besides whatever it is that you came in originally for, besides, because a lot of people are like, oh, I'll just smoke weed. Like, no. Or everything I like to do, I smoke weed with. And I'm like, no. So I've started to like go back to like when they were kids and a lot of the CRM too is like bringing them back to when they were 4 or 5 and dealing with that little kid and saying it's okay. How can the adult you parent the little kid because they didn't have that? And they really enjoy that. They also really enjoy coming up with new projects. One person started diamond painting, which I'd never heard of and had to look that up, where it's really cool. And then someone else started woodworking. I had one client that actually built a guitar that actually works. So they put their grief into something else. And I also let them know that, again, you could be driving down the street and all of a sudden it's going to come up, and feel it. Don't keep like, let it come up. Let it, if you need to pull over to the side of the road. I can say when my own dad died, I was the strong one in the family. I didn't grieve him for a year because I was told, oh, you're going to have to be the strong one and everything's going to be okay now. What? So I didn't feel like I had permission. So part of my job is to give them permission. So when I was driving down the street and a year later and just started sobbing because I'm like, oh, I'm finally feeling the grief. I can't remember if a song came on or I smelled something. It doesn't matter. I just pulled over and let myself grieve. And I say the same thing to my students, like, please feel that grief. Let it not necessarily wash over you, but like let it wash through you so that you can move on from it. Because if you keep pushing it down, it's going to come up in really destructive ways. And they're like, I've had one person that was a cutter, and it turns out she felt, it was a very bizarre thing. She felt closer to her mom when she cut, because they bonded over that when she was a kid. And I'm like, okay, so how can you bond with your mom without having to hurt yourself? And she's like, well, it's always superficial. I'm like, right now it's superficial. At some point it may not be superficial. So it's giving them the tools of like grieving, crying, meditation, going for a run, going for a walk, being out in nature, playing with your dog or your cat. And it's also, when I do the CRM, one of the things that I talk with them about is getting them to their new truth. So it's reminding them of what that new truth is, because they come up with it, not me. And I always have people feel like, I've had a lot of people when they finish, they're like, I feel kind of drunk. I'm like, it's just your oxytocin changing your neuro. So just breathe. You'll feel like that for a while. I said, but please don't go out and actually drink or smoke right now, because and they're like, oh, that's a good point. So those are some of the really interesting things that I get to deal with, and I never know what I'm going to get, which I kind of like too, around the grief process and when it's going to come up.
So for your students that are working with addictions,
Mm-hmm.
addiction is just, you know, we're not able to manage what's going on inside, and somebody introduces us to a substance or a behavior that
Yep.
makes that quiet for a minute, and that sort of becomes a permanent marriage. So in terms of just getting anyone to agree to just feel their way through the grief instead of trying to escape from it, but in particular with addicts, helping them as part of their relapse prevention
Yeah.
or learning about their triggers. How do you weave in that idea that, you start to feel, and then it gets
Mm-hmm.
worse and worse and worse, and
Yeah.
the next thing you know, you're doing your thing.
Yeah.
So how do you weave in somewhere in here? Well, let's try something new.
So really, it's a lot of, I don't really bring in, depending on where they're at, I try to have them have a little bit of sobriety before they come in. Even if they're in a harm reduction approach, one of the things that I always say is you cannot smoke and or drink or use whatever your substance of choice is 12 hours before you've come in, because I want you to feel things. And I talk a lot about, I do a lot of education with them, like, substances are a brilliant strategy until they're not. Thank you, TJ Woodward. I want to like give props to TJ, who coined that phrase and is one of the best phrases I've ever used, because I agree with him. It's a brilliant strategy until it's not. I also let them know that, they're going to be really dysregulated, because their feelings are going to be all over the place, because all the drugs, you're either up or down or numb. So I want them, I said, part of it is I do a lot of deep breathing work with them. Like, I want them to do a lot of box breathing. I want them to do some dragon breath, where they'll breathe in and just breathe out whatever it is that they're feeling, so that they can get in touch with what it feels like. A lot of times, what I'll do is, before I even do some CRM, I'll ask them to close their eyes, and I'll be like, okay, right now you're feeling super upset about whatever it is. Where do you feel that in your body? And they're like, what? I'm like, just feel it in your body. So I get them looking like, oh, it's in my chest. I'm like, okay, I want you to breathe into your chest. And like, okay. I said, so how does that feel? I'm like, I'm not asking about feelings like right now, but what does that feel like to breathe into your chest? And they're like, feels a little scary. I'm like, okay, let's keep going with that. And then after that, then I'll work them through the whole process of grounding them, of centering them, of getting them into their sacred place. And then I'm like, okay, let's go through the grief, knowing that you're safe, and that this is a completely safe space, and that you can have your power animal, something from nature, a spiritual being with you as you're doing this. So you're not alone. Because a lot of times, especially 18 to 25-year-olds, they feel like they're all alone and no one knows what they're talking about. So I normalize that, first of all, they're not alone. And second of all, this is not a one and done, and we're going to go it as slow or as fast. And what I've noticed is they go fast. And I don't know if it's just because they're young, but like normally CRM sessions take about an hour. They're done in like 35 to 45 minutes. And part of me is like, am I doing it wrong? And I'm like, no, they're just going through it. But I also let them know that sometimes when they leave, they may still residually come up with stuff and it's okay. And that they can, healthy message me or email me or call me on my work phone if something comes up that they don't know how to deal with. Because they never know what's going to happen. But it's really about getting them from being dysregulated to getting them regulated. And it takes some time. And I let them know you're going to feel dysregulated. It's okay. A lot of it, sometimes I'll be like, go take a shower. Water's a great conduit for, and I said, I want you to imagine that grief like just leaving your body through, and they really like that. Because
Oh,
I'm giving them permission, not that they need it, but they need it to like cry and like no one sees you, no one can hear you. And like, oh, I love that idea. Or like, we've got the equestrian center. I'm like, go to the horses. I said, horses are amazing conduit for grief and just for what people are feeling. I said, even if you can't ride, because they're not allowed to ride, but like just go be with the horse. And they're like, oh, that's a great idea. I said, or go walk in the arboretum, play with the ducks. I said, feed the ducks, but not bread. They're like, okay. So I try to give them ways of, I said, the other thing is we do have a grief support group. Most of them don't want to do the grief support group, but I definitely let them know about Aggies for Recovery, which is our collegiate recovery harm reduction group. I said, other people, yes, it's about recovery, but grief is part of recovery. So it's another safe space for you to talk about it. I don't think anyone's done that yet, but I've let them know that it's an option for them.
well, that's great to know that there's an option for them to hang out with people that are trying to grow and figure
Yeah,
things out. Because can sort of feel like the ugly duckling swimming around
yeah.
with the swans while you're in growth mode and everybody else is in avoidance mode.
Hmm.
So, what are the other things that college students have available to them? Say a college student is doing fine and then their parent dies and they're gone on leave for a minute, but they got to come back. They have to
Yeah.
finish. And so they
There,
have to suck it up and get back to work. So, what's available to them for in terms of support?
there's all sorts of things. So there's the counseling center has sessions where we have clinicians that you can get 4 to 10 sessions a year. And if there's something serious going on, most clinicians are able to see it 1 or 2 clients longer term if they talk to their supervisor about it. So if it's something where we had one student where, again, with what's going on in Gaza and everything, they might be able to see someone longer. We also have specialized clinicians. So if someone speaks a different language, we've got Mandarin speaking, we've got
Hmm.
um, people from the Manasseh community, we've got Jewish counselors. So we've got people from the African diaspora, and I can never say that correctly, so I'm hoping I'm saying it correctly. We also have our CAN counselors. So CAN stands for Community Action Network. And these are clinicians that go into the community and do presentations. And they can meet with students much longer term because if they're just doing consultations, they don't have to do their notes, so they can see students longer. There are also tons of groups. So there's a writing group. So maybe it's not necessarily around grief, but maybe you start writing and that helps with your grief. There is a specific grief group. There is a group for people with chronic illnesses because again, one of the things I didn't talk about is chronic illnesses can be grief. You may have to grieve the fact that, for years you were okay and now all of a sudden you've got cancer or you've got MS, or you suddenly get type 2 diabetes, which is a chronic illness. I have one of my students actually that's going to start the chronic illness group because she's 19 years old and has huge stomach issues. And so she can't do a lot. And she's actually becoming underweight. And so she's grieving the fact that she's not able to gain weight. And so she's going to join the grief group, which I think would be great for her as well. I mean, the chronic illness group, because they'll talk about that as well. So there's all sorts of groups, and people can go on to the website. It's the counseling, it's ucdavis.cs.edu or just, look Counseling Center Davis, and they've got the group, you go down to the drop down menu and it says groups, and it will list all the groups. Because we're in summer session right now, we're still finalizing all the groups for fall. Davis is on the quarter system, so we'll start in September. So right after September, people can go on and be like, oh, these are the groups. And most of the groups are ongoing. There are a few groups that are like there's a neurodivergent group. And they start at a specific time and they go for 6 weeks. So, but other groups like Aggies and some of the other ones, you can come and go as you please.
Oh, that's great. So what would you say, because you also you have a private practice on the side where you work with adults. Some students come on over there, but also adults.
Yes.
And you've been working in the recovery community for years. So what would you say what is the difference that you notice about the ways that grown-ups manage or avoid their grief as opposed to the way young people manage or avoid their grief?
That's a really good question, because one of my clients actually, I was working with around her mom and codependency, and she was older, and then her mom died. And so she's like, "Oh, I'm good, I'm done." I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa." You're not done. She did not want to deal with her grief. She still has not dealt with her grief. I have tried 4 different times to do CRM with her. She will not do CRM. She's very avoidant. And I think the difference that I'm seeing is that depending on where someone's at, younger people are much more willing to deal with it and work on it. And maybe it's because I joke that their frontal lobe isn't developed until they're 25. And some people are not 25 yet, or they're just 25. They want the technology and they want to do it now. Where my older adults tend to be much more resistant, and they want to be, I don't want to say they want to stay stuck, but they want to stay stuck. They get a charge out of poor me. And I actually had to tell one person, if you're not willing to work with me, I can't work with you anymore, because you're just throwing money at me and it's not working for you or for me. This was right after the election, and they'd stopped all their friendships if anyone was even remotely. So I was like, "You're isolating," and she hadn't dealt with her. This was the same person. I'm like, "You're so angry all the time. Let's work." She would not work on the anger, and finally, after 2 months, she came back and she's like, "Okay, I'm ready to work on the anger now, and I'm ready to work on the grief." I'm like, "Good," because they were very interconnected. So I think with the older adults, I'm finding that the other thing I'm finding with older adults is they think they're fixed much quicker. And so they'll stop working with me because they think they're fixed. And then like a month later, they're like, "Oh, I'm not fixed yet." I'm like, this is like an onion. We're still peeling layers. The way I look at it is, but I'm a consummate learner, and I'm trying to always find new things and get new things and feel like I'm never completely fixed. I've done a lot of work, but it's a work in progress. Not that I want people to work with me forever, because there are some people that I feel, okay, yes, it's time for us to like stop. But I feel like a lot of times people feel like they're better, and instead of continuing to do the work so they can get more tools, they leave. So it's almost like I've gone through my stages and now I'm good. And it's like, but I always say so many people think it's about stages. And yes, there are stages, but I don't necessarily believe that it's linear. But they think it's linear. So they felt, oh, I was in denial, and then I got bargaining, and then blah, and I've accepted it. And I'm like, just because you've accepted it doesn't mean there isn't more work to do, but they feel like they're done. So if they feel they're done, I'm like, okay, if you feel you're done, you're done. And if I'm always here, and then usually they'll come back and be like, oh, something else came up. I'm like, okay, let's work on that.
Yeah, the people who say, you know, my mom died, I haven't got much going on. Like, I'm kind of an example of that. My mom was so destructive that I've spent most of my life doing therapy, just trying to clean up all of that and get to the place where she doesn't have her hands around my throat.
Right.
So when this person who was really more the source of stress and pain died, the first thing I felt was like, oh, good, I can stop trying to make that work. And the second thing I felt was mostly some part of me had been still holding out hope that there would be a magical intervention. And this
Yeah.
very wounded borderline personality disorder alcoholic would magically turn into a mommy. So the hope died. It was
Right.
more that hope that died. And then a friend said to me, no matter how old you are, when your second parent died, you're still an orphan. And so that sense of that feeling of, oh, yeah, now I'm someone with no parents. But then I kind of was someone with no parents all along.
Right.
And then another thing was someone said you've held a big hole in your heart trying to fill it with a mommy. And now that she's gone, only you can decide what you're going to do with that hole in your heart. So that's that sense of grief slowly morphing to where you find a sense of purpose inside of the grief. You don't outrun it, but it's like, okay, come on, we're going to go do something else now. You bring the
Yeah.
pain with you back into life. So that trying to figure out, well, who am I? If I'm not that person who's constantly being reminded by this mean lady, well, who am I?
And I think that's a big thing that I talk about with the students too, and some of my older clients too. Like when I'll use that same person, like when her mom died, I was like, yeah, what can you get back to? And she didn't want to do, and that's the part that she's really resisting. Like, she's like, well, nothing excites me anymore. I don't even want to leave the house. And I'm like, of course, because you're grief. And she didn't want to look at that as grief. I'm like, you're grieving. But I had to come about it in a very, sometimes I'm very direct. With a lot of my substance abusing clients, I have to be direct. I was not direct. I had to be much more caring and much more like, I don't want to say backdooring it, but kind of like backdooring it to be like, okay, what can we do to get you back to the things you loved? She was a painter. I'm like, what about taking a class? What about doing, I mean, we're talking major painter because I don't want to give that away. And she didn't even want to do that. But the one thing we finally worked on is she had two horses and a pony, and she
Hmm.
loved that pony. And I'm like, then go spend time with your pony. Your pony brings you joy. Spend time with the pony. Spend time with other people that bring you joy. Because, her husband was busy playing golf all the time. So she didn't feel like and I'm like, and let him know that you need him now a little bit more. Well, he won't have you try. And it really, she hadn't tried. So when she told him what she needed, he actually was there. And she's like, oh my God, the pony was amazing. So, and she was sending me pictures because she would start dressing him up. So she was able to deal with it in a different way than me being really direct, like, okay, we need to deal with the grief right now, because that wasn't going to work for her.
Yeah, that's great that you can find those other creative ways for people to sort of reawaken the joy and find room for something besides
Right.
the pain in there.
Yeah.
So always in my interviews, I always ask people for their 1 minute wisdom. So if you could leave people who watch this with just one thought of what's the most important thing for you that people should know about students in grief, or that students should know about grief, what's your 1 minute wisdom?
My 1 minute wisdom is what I said at the beginning is it's not a one and done. It's very convoluted. It's not linear. You will get through it somehow, however that looks for you, and know that it comes in waves and that it's never really done, but that it gets easier and easier to handle as the time goes by. And I hate this, but it's so true. Time does heal. So I think that's the important thing is not that it heals. And you notice I didn't say all wounds, time heals. So I think in this case, time heals the grief. So it's not so overwhelming,
Right.
so that it doesn't give you that like kick. It's just kind of like, okay, I can handle it. Yes, I'm sad. Yesterday was my parents' anniversary. My dad's not here anymore. I was sad. I called my mom actually, but it wasn't this overwhelming, like sobbing, oh my God, I'm so sad. It's like I'm sad,
Yeah.
where at first I would be like sobbing, like I was mad. That's the other thing I would say. My other thing is it's okay to be mad. Like I think we're taught like, oh, you have to be sorry that they're gone. You can be mad that they're gone. I was pissed for a long time too that he didn't, like, I felt like he gave up. But I've dealt with that now and realized he was in a lot of pain. So I would say that's my other thing is like feel I guess this is longer than a minute. Sorry, I can't do it in a minute. But you know, feel the feelings and move through them and know that it will get better, would be my final
Right.
snippet.
Because we all know grief doesn't heal. You sort of integrate it. So
Right.
there's other things, not just at first there's just the grief, and eventually there's the grief and the other things.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So that's great. Well, thank you so much for doing this with
You're
me,
so welcome. I enjoyed it.
sharing your wisdom with you. And I'm gonna turn off the recorder now.